Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 309. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And I'm here today with, I guess you're part of the team. You're a jiu-jitsu family member. I've got Mr. Drew Foster, sometimes known as Darce Knight on Reddit, sometimes known as Drew Darce. The one commonality there is the letter D and the Darce choke, but that's not what we're talking about today. How's it going, Drew? Why don't you give everyone a quick reminder about who you are and what the topic is today?
Hey, everyone. I'm doing well. It's great to talk with you, Steve. I am here today to talk a little bit about Anaconda choke stuff. So that's something that I've been working on a little bit over the past few years, and I just put out an instructional on that. I'm trying to work on a website and get some online coaching stuff out there, and yeah, I thought it would be cool if we talked about some Anaconda stuff.
Amazing, man. Well, let's plug the instructional. For those who follow you, they're probably aware that not too long ago, you released your first instructional, Darce Dynamics. This time, you've got Anaconda Antics. I love the alliteration, the two letters.
I'm trying to find a couple little silly, clever titles to call things. So yeah, everything I have is just on that same little darcedynamics.com URL. There's a couple deals on there at any given time. BJJMM 20 is one that just kind of is always up there for anybody that listens to your show. They want to get 20% off anything there. And I do have a little like guaranteed satisfaction thing. If anybody's unhappy with anything for any reason, I won't bug you or ask any questions. If you let me know, I'll refund what you got or try to make you happy with something else, whatever you like.
I can't wait until you get to the point where you're doing like an X-Guard instructional or a Z-Lock instructional and you have to figure out a word that starts with X or Z that you can put in the instructional name. That's going to be amusing.
Yeah, I might put those off. That might be difficult. I got to start thinking about it now.
Yeah. All of that said, you've been on the podcast many times, and of course our premium subscribers or listeners to your Neon Belly podcast are going to know who you are. But if someone's joining the party late here, do you want to just give yourself a quick introduction in terms of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I am a black belt in North Carolina. I live in Durham, and I've trained for a long time. I made a push a few years ago to leave my desk job to try to make a living from training. And right now I teach at a gym called Elevate MMA. I teach a lot of the jiu-jitsu classes there. And then I also do a couple podcast things. I work with Brandon McCatherine and the PGF as the chief of staff. And then I do some stuff with you on BJJ Mental Models. I have my own little podcast called Neon Belly, but Neon, like neon instead of neon, just like a little play on words. And right now I'm just trying to see how much I can make a career out of jiu-jitsu without having to open a brick and mortar gym, because I have some really cool and unique opportunities to travel right now and do some other things. And I'm really trying to take advantage of some of that and see how much I can get going without having to settle in for the long haul on opening a gym. But someday I'll probably do that as well. But yeah, brief introduction to me. I've been training a long time. Definitely have always specialized a little bit in head and arm chokes, arm triangles, guillotines, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've previously been on the podcast before talking about the Darce choke, of course, your namesake. Today, though, we're still talking about head and arm chokes, but it's a bit of a pun, but I guess we're going to pivot and change the angle a little bit. Instead of doing a Darce choke, we're going to talk about the Anaconda choke. We've talked about this before on the podcast a long time ago with mutual friend of ours, Matt Skaff. But man, today I want to give you the floor here. Why don't you kick this off? You just released this new instructional, so I know it's fresh in your mind. You've got all of this conceptually organized. Let's go, man.
Yeah. All right. So basically, Matt Skaff, the guy that you mentioned, he's a big inspiration for me doing some stuff with the Anaconda. As far as the head and arm chokes go, I really put a lot of time into the Darce first, and then the guillotine, and then with the Anaconda for years, I just couldn't really figure out how to finish it. I went to a Rafa Mendez seminar and a private lesson of his. He's probably the best Anaconda choker of all time, and he showed details, and they were great details, but for the better part of 10 years, I just really couldn't get it to work for me on people my own skill level or better. And so I just kind of wrote it off. And then just during a random trip to train at 10th Planet Decatur in Alabama, Matt Skaff, who's one of Brandon McCatherin's black belts, and he kind of runs the gym there, he showed me a couple details with it because he caught it on me a few times when we rolled. And he showed me a few details that I just had never seen. And it really just kind of blew my mind and made it something that I actually started using. And no head and arm chokes particularly. I got my black belt a couple years ago. Head and arm chokes, they haven't really been a very big part of my game since I got my black belt, to be honest. I've been focused a lot more on guard passing and back control and full mount and like rear naked chokes and stuff like that. But the head and arm choke, the Anaconda kind of got me re-excited to explore some head and arm choke stuff again post black belt, which has been kind of fun because I've got to re-explore an area that originally was like a first love in jiu-jitsu, and I kind of stayed away from for a while, but now I've got to explore a bunch of new stuff with this Anaconda over the past couple of years.
Awesome, man. Well, for those who are completely new to this, I always hate to try to describe submissions over audio. My recommendation is if you need a visual, if you don't know what this move looks like, go on YouTube, look it up, or even better, buy Drew's instructional, Anaconda Antics, now available on his website, link in the show notes. But with all of that said, what an Anaconda choke is very similar to a Darce choke where you're wrapping your arms around the person's head and one of their arms. But the main difference is with a Darce choke, the point where you connect your own arms is by their neck. With the Anaconda, the point where you connect your own arms is by their shoulder. Basically, though, it's a head and arm choke, right? You're wrapping, it's like arm triangle, head and arm choke, Darce choke, even Peruvian necktie. These are all related in that you're using your arms to create a head and arm choke around the body. What are your thoughts on the Anaconda choke in terms of how it compares to the Darce choke? Is there a situation where you might choose one versus the other? Do you have a favorite? Just curious how these two fit into the same game plan together.
Sure. Yeah. And real quick on the first thing you said about trying to describe it over audio, which can be difficult. The biggest thing that's helped me is to tell people that Anaconda, just if you kind of visualize how a snake eats its food, right? It lines up in a straight line with it. It opens its jaws and then it clamps over the top. So the Anaconda choke, that's where it comes from. When you're lined up with your partner and you're kind of over the top of their head, you just reach across the neck and your hand pops out the shoulder and then you close the grip. The Darce is off at the deltoid. You're off to the side, cut out at an angle. So I think Darce deltoid. I'm out over the shoulder sideways and then I reach across from the shoulder out to the neck from the side. So that's been like an easy way to help me remember it. As far as just kind of how they compare and sit with each other, I do think it's helpful to compare them a lot. I think the Darce, you probably just see more in general, both in jiu-jitsu and MMA. And a big reason for that is you don't need as much armpit exposure to make it happen. And what I mean by that is if you are sitting listening to this right now and you put your hand up over your head like you're asking a question in class to like your teacher, your armpit is fully showing as much of your armpit as possible, right? To make an Anaconda happen, that's what you're going to need. You really need that maximum level of armpit exposure. The Darce doesn't need quite as much exposure, right? If you go from raising your hand up in the air over your head to pointing your hand out straight to the side, that's about the level of armpit exposure that you need in order to get the Darce. So it's a little more forgiving in that regard. But there's some pros and cons that come with that. So you may think, if it's easier to reach for a Darce, why would I worry about trying to get the arm all the way up over the head? Well, there's a lot of benefits that come with that, such as your ability to pin your opponent in place and really kind of keep them still and hold them down on the mat while you work everything into position. So as far as when I would go for one over the other, honestly, these days I usually am attacking like a guillotine or an Anaconda first to really maximize that armpit exposure. And then I can feel as if I can kind of choose from there whether I want to just pursue the Anaconda or switch back to a Darce. And we'll talk about it more later, but ultimately I think it's easier to go from Anaconda or guillotine to Darce than it is to go from Darce to Anaconda. So I usually would probably start with the Anaconda. Most of them are going to come off similar situations though. Somebody wrestling up into you, fighting for an underhook, the front headlock position. A lot of those positions are where they come from. The Darce does have a few more setups and a few more entries, but most of the places that they come from are very similar.
That's a really great way to think of things. I never thought of that. Whenever I talk about the Anaconda choke or the Darce choke, I tell people that it's about where their hands are connected. And I think that probably most people use that as the way to describe it, but it's an awkward way to explain how these work. And where your hands are connected isn't really the goal. It's more about what are you trying to do to the other person's body. So I really like that explanation. And you're right, with an Anaconda, most of the time when you kick that off, because of where your hands are connected, you're lined up with the person. You're kind of in a straight line with them. Often where you see the Anaconda is if you can get the other person to turtle, then you're straight ahead with them. Whereas the Darce choke, because of the way your hands are connected, you often wind up to the side of the person. That's also a really good point in terms of why we maybe don't see the Anaconda as much. I've wondered about this for a while. Why is it that we get so many people who gravitate towards the Darce, but the Anaconda, you just don't see it that often? And I think you're right. In jiu-jitsu, a good grappler is going to keep their armpit space closed, and that's going to make it hard for you to get the Anaconda. Whereas with the Darce, it might just be easier to sneak your hands in there around their neck. But you tell me, though, you're the expert.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think it's kind of a couple reasons at least. There's probably multiple reasons, but one reason is just kind of through the history of the sport, the Anaconda seemed to pop up first, and then the Darce started popping up on the scene shortly after, and it just kind of took off in popularity a little bit. It had more grapplers, I think, that were popular associated with it. There were more big name grapplers that lost to the move. Marcelo Garcia, famously, one of his only submission losses ever in the ADCC Absolute Finals was to a Darce. And I think, as our sport can be, it can just kind of be trendy sometimes, and people follow trends a lot and just sort of go after stuff that is in fashion. So I think that is a big part of it. And then I also just think there tend to have been less Anaconda specialists in the sport and a few less examples of people to really look at. And then again, right now, I think very few people that are really maximizing the Anaconda to the full potential. I really don't feel as if I'm trying to sell a snake oil thing on that, but just the amount of people, even that finish them, the amount of people I see truly getting that maximum armpit exposure and really pursuing that, it's a handful of people. There's very few people, and I do think it's going to become a little bit more popular once people figure out a few details for it. And I have been seeing a few more of them this year as opposed to most years. But yeah, that Darce just does seem to be just a little bit more popular and a little bit trendier, I guess I would say.
You bring up a good point, though. Maybe the problem is it's not that one of these moves is better than the other. Maybe it's just human nature and where our attention goes, and that makes one technique more popular than the other. The Anaconda, for example, when I first became aware of the Anaconda, it was in my gym. It started taking off in popularity, and I think part of it was because in Pride, there were some folks, I think it might have been Minotauro Nogueira, who kind of had a reputation for liking this choke, but that's still a relatively small platform. You think about the Darce choke, right? I mean, you started seeing this in the UFC, you started hearing Joe Rogan talk about it, and maybe it's just that it came around on a bigger stage in a time when the sport was getting more attention, in a place where more jiu-jitsu athletes were looking, and maybe the reason why we see the Darce more isn't because it's better, but just because it's more popular, right? Sometimes these things create a feedback loop where the more people see it, the more they do it, the more people do it, the more people will see it, and things just become more popular, even if they're not necessarily better than the other options.
Absolutely. And then also a third reason is because, I meant to say this earlier, but how we said you need the front headlock position to get many Anaconda chokes. There's a couple angles where you don't need it, but when people get all the way to the front headlock, a lot of times they usually just go to a guillotine, which is just kind of a super obvious answer from there. So even if you're not a specialist, if you get to a front headlock, you can intuitively find your way into a guillotine pretty easily. So I think with that head-on position, and you could cut the angle and go to a Darce as well, but a lot of people, when they get to that front headlock position, they just are really thinking guillotines, or they're going behind the elbows to try to attack the turtle position and take the back.
Yeah. Now, you said that you were really struggling with the Anaconda choke for a long time, and then Matt Skaff showed you some details that really changed the game for you. And I'd love to know what those were. I think many people are probably in this situation where they're aware of the Anaconda choke, but they just don't have luck with it. What were the things that you learned that turned this from a move that you just didn't have any success with to something that you could actually pull off reasonably well against good people?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, I think that the biggest thing was during the entry into the position, making sure that you get your opponent's elbow and their arm straight up over their head, again, like they're asking a question in class. The easiest position to kind of illustrate it, again, I'll try to avoid describing too many moves on a podcast in a lot of detail because that can be tough for listeners. But if your opponent's down on their back and they're wrestling up into you, up onto a single leg, and they punch that underhook, instead of dropping behind their head and just thinking about putting your lock together, you really want to think about, with your overhooking arm, pinching it to your ribs and really gluing their elbow to your torso as much as possible. And then when you fall behind their head to line up with them, you're peeling their elbow way out above their head in the process. And a lot of people, they just put a chin strap grip together, they just put an arm and guillotine grip together, they fall behind the head, and they don't dominate their opponent's elbow position at all. And maybe if they're better, they can get away with putting the figure 4 rear naked choke grip together and making it work. Or even what Rafa Mendez would do is he would fall behind the head like that and then rock back up on his shoulders and use his legs to kind of trap the arm and pull the arm open up over the head. But you don't see a lot of people that really pinch the elbow to their ribs and open it up during the entry. And not only does it increase that armpit exposure that we talked about earlier, but it really pins your opponent in place. If somebody's on the ground, on their back, on their side, and their elbow is stuck up over their head, they can't really fight back to their knees effectively. They just have very little defensive options. And people also just love to put their hands together, whether it's the guillotine with that arm and guillotine grip, whether it's a Doris choke and that vice grip. Everybody just attacks the posture with all their head and arm chokes. And that's super intuitive. That's not a bad thing to do, but people do not spend enough energy on attacking the elbow posture and the arm posture of their opponent, which is equally as important, if not more important, because frankly, if you're attacking the head, your arm is going to get over the head 8 or 9 times out of 10 if you're even halfway thinking about it. But getting the elbow just opened up and in a super vulnerable position is just not what most people are doing. I actually think it's super beneficial to not connect your hands at all and just keep your arms totally separate, almost like a little penguin. Like if you see a penguin has his little wings down at his side, you kind of want to do that, right? You can grab a chin strap with one hand and keep your elbow tight if you want, but you don't even have to. You can just drape over your partner's head and arm while they're wrestling up from bottom side control and just kind of pinch your hands onto your side like that. And you can really drag their elbow super open and out of position up over their head fairly easily by doing that. Whether you want to attack anacondas, darces, high-risk guillotines, whatever, I think keeping your hands unconnected is very efficient and is going to be a direction that we see people going when they attack head and arm chokes going forward.
Yeah, something that you've brought up, which I think is important, is when we do submissions like this, we sometimes get overly focused on following the steps that we're told to do and not really thinking about whether we're actually breaking the person's posture or structure or base. And with arm triangles, Darce chokes, anacondas, this is a perfect example of this. It's so easy to look at these like, well, coach said put my hands together and squeeze, so that's what I'm going to do. And I've definitely been guilty of this, where I see the opening for an anaconda, I connect my hands, but I don't really actually have any control over the other person. I've connected my hands together, but I haven't done the things you talked about, like pull their elbow out. And when that happens, if you try to do something like gator roll, you're probably going to wind up on bottom side control because there's no reason why your opponent needs to come with you. So something that Rob Bernanke talks about is focusing on alignment over position and not thinking so much about, okay, where are my hands and what are they doing? But am I really doing something that's actually going to break this person's alignment? And so I think the main lesson there, which you've touched on, is if you want to get the Anaconda, it's less about just connecting your hands and, putting your hand on your bicep or however you like to do it. And it's more about pulling that elbow free so that their alignment is compromised. The problem is if you don't do that and you latch onto them and you get that hand connection, you might be connected to them, but if you haven't broken their alignment, you're kind of tethered to them now. You're kind of screwed because you might have a connection to them, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you can move them or do what you want to them. What you really need to do is start attacking the alignment. And that's a great example. Yes, you can, of course, mess with the person's posture by pushing on their neck or whatever you like to do. But the arm is a big part of it too, because if the person has their elbow tight, it's going to be a lot harder to manipulate their body.
Yeah, 100%. And just to make an analogy, right? Because everybody's familiar with the triangle choke. One of the big pitfalls that people make with the triangle choke is they try to lock their lock too early. And if you try to lock it too early, it can be hard to make adjustments later. You kind of shut down your own hip mobility. You shut down your ability to move your own legs into position and rebite and make the triangle tighter and cut your angles and take your opponents back out of the lock and slip it. There's just so much when you just chase the steps and the end product, which, like you said, is having either the hands locked together or that rear naked choke grip. If you just chase that end product and you don't think about attacking the structure and getting your opponent out of good position first, you're just going to shut down your own ability to adjust things and make the movements needed to finish. So I think the way that Rob describes it there with attacking their structure and just getting them out of position. Position doesn't just mean side control mount, back, or even leg entanglements, right? It just any spot that your opponent can be in where they're stronger. It just means attacking that and putting them in a more vulnerable position. And what I tell students all the time in my classes, right? When you want to open a pickle jar, you bring your elbows in tight to your ribs. Everything comes in close like that. Nobody opens a pickle jar with their elbows out to the side or up over their head, right? So anytime you can do that to somebody, it's going to make them weak and it's going to make you strong. So I want to keep my elbows close as I attack your elbow position and your head, and I want to open your elbow up. So I'm getting stronger while you're getting weaker.
Yeah. Great insight. And there is nothing sadder in jiu-jitsu than seeing someone try to go for an Anaconda gator roll, but not having their elbow properly opened up, and they basically wind up just pulling bottom side control. It's hilarious to watch, but not a mistake that you ever want to be the one making.
I just said, yeah, it's the worst, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are turned off the Anaconda early because they try it and then they fail. They have that exact mistake and they think, this just isn't the move for me. But realistically, part of that might just be the fact that they were focusing more on following the steps than on breaking the person's alignment. Something that you hear all the time in jiu-jitsu as a concept is you want to open your opponent's elbows. If their elbows are in tight, they're coiled up, they have the ability to be explosive. It's hard to get the leverage over their arms that you need to really do anything. But if you can keep the person's elbow open and free, it makes a lot of submissions and control mechanisms easier. And so I think this is a great example of where looking at things from a conceptual level instead of just a pure, hey, what are the techniques level, can be really helpful. And I would say for a lot of people, rather than trying to hunt the Anaconda from top turtle, it probably makes sense to try to focus on opening up the person's armpit and getting into that space. That's going to be really helpful, right? If you can expose the person's armpit or their neck or something else, that's going to give you a lot of options rather than trying to hunt for a submission before the possibility of doing anything with it is even there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other concept that people can take away a little bit, and I think this can actually, you mentioned people being scared off from the Anaconda early on. I think one thing that people can maybe reframe with, and this is one of the advantages for the Anaconda, is that there's really only pretty much one position to finish it in. So if you are choking somebody with your right arm, you're going to want to end up on your right hip where your choking knuckles are kind of pointed up towards the ceiling. And that's pretty much the only place you see it finished. Occasionally, you may see like a closed guard position or a mounted position, but they're pretty rare. As opposed to the darce has so many different ways where it can be finished. You can finish it top, bottom, sideways. You can finish it mounted, closed guard, knee on belly, half guard, bottom half guard. There's all these different angles, butterfly guard, and that can be overwhelming for people. But with the Anaconda, again, because you can really pin your opponent and hold them in one place on their side, as long as you find the correct hip and get that hand pointed up to the ceiling, you really don't have to worry about a lot of mobility in the system. And you can really take your time. You can use your legs to trap that arm a little bit deeper. It's really good if you're smaller against bigger people because you can hold them in place with your leg. You can drag that elbow open and hold it with your legs and then deepen your arms to where they need to be and then punch the final grip into place. With the Darce, since it's more forgiving with that elbow position and that armpit exposure we were talking about, you can maybe get a bite on it earlier, but you're going to have to do a lot of extra work to finish it. You're going to have to scramble around with your partner as they roll around until you can trap their legs or get your legs over their body to like a mount or a closed guard. But there's just a lot more when their elbow is not open up over their head all the way and just more kind of out to the side, they can move a lot more. So I think the Darce is really good if you like to scramble and have movement and you can kind of lure people up into it. But the Anaconda is one where if you really have some of the good details on it, you can really pin somebody in place and insist on it and really put them into that position where they're stuck. And that's just a huge benefit to it that can be helpful for people that might be overwhelmed at all the options of like the Darce or all the guillotine variations. There's a million styles of guillotine out there. With the Anaconda, there's pretty much just one way to finish it, and focusing on that can make it feel less overwhelming.
There's a few things you said there that I want to expand on. One of the things you said was you talked about how this move might be good for smaller people, and that might surprise a lot of people that you said that. And I want to dig into that. But before you do, something else that I want to just bring up here. You're talking here a lot about the idea of using the Anaconda not just as a submission, but actually as a position itself. You talked about how you don't need to rush to get the submission. You can use this as a control point, take your time. And this idea of using a submission as a position is super key for the development of really tight control-based jiu-jitsu. We actually made a whole course on our premium service with Rob Bernacki about submission as position, where we walked through a lot of the more common submissions and talked about how you can actually play these as a position. And I think with something like the Anaconda, it's especially important not to rush into trying to get the finish, because even if you don't get the finish, it is an amazing control position. Being able to latch onto someone's head and neck, it really takes away a lot of their options. I think rushing to try to finish it is a mistake. I think that leads to the situation we talked about where you might wind up losing everything because you try to go for the finish too early. If you latch onto someone's head and neck, it is very hard for them to do anything. They have to constantly be dealing with the threat of that submission. And when you're threatening someone with a submission, it becomes a lot easier to do other things like advanced position, transition to something else. So I always encourage people, when you think of a submission, understand it's not just about, hey, I can get the tap. A lot of the time, the real power of a submission comes from, I use this as a way to keep my opponent busy while I move up the positional hierarchy or get to a better spot. Probably another very obvious example that people think about is the Kimura trap. I would say these days, a lot of people don't even really use the Kimura trap to finish. They use it to get past someone's guard or get to their back. So the Anaconda is a very powerful tool for the same reason. That head and arm control, even if you don't get the tap right away, it's a great way to make sure that you dominate the position.
Yeah, exactly. That Kimura trap, that is the same. It's this exact same idea. Somebody is wrestling up into you with that underhook and you just get the controls that you need and just kind of roll over your shoulder and you're right behind their head. So the Kimura trap and the Anaconda are basically the same style control. It's just the Kimura, you have 2-on-1 on the arms, and the Anaconda, you have some kind of control on the head or the posture and then a pinch on that elbow. And it's the most pinning position in jiu-jitsu that's where your weight is not on top of your opponent, except for maybe that like double trouble from that saddle 411 cross ashi kind of position. That saddle cross ashi and the Anaconda behind the head are for sure the two positions I think where you can pin people the best without having to have your weight on top of them. also excluding back control. Some people don't consider that a pin since your weight's not like on top of the person. But yeah, those three, back control, that anaconda, and that double trouble kind of saddle cross ashi position. Super, super powerful pinning attack position.
Yeah. Something else here that I want to pick your brain about. You talked about the anaconda for smaller people. And that's a really interesting take because you see a lot of bigger people finish anacondas. I've always felt as a smaller guy that if I'm in there with someone much larger than me, it can be really hard to finish someone with a head and arm choke. But tell me a little bit about why you think that the anaconda is a good solution for smaller people. And also if a smaller person should be doing anything differently from a bigger person when it comes to how they use this technique.
Sure. Yeah. Great question. So for smaller people, it would seem at first like, oh man, maybe not, but it really is. I mean, Rafa Mendes in his prime was a 66 kilo grappler at 80cc. And if I pull out my calculator real quick to see that weight in pounds, it's 145 pounds. So that's pretty small. And there's a round, I'll send this link so you can put it in the show notes if you like, but there's a round where Rafa was training with Andre Galvao in both of their primes. And Galvao was cutting weight to get to 88 kilos. So Galvao was more than 2 weight classes bigger. And they did like a 10-minute round. They were exhausted. You can hear them both like audibly grunting and just really tired during the roll. And in the last 20 seconds, Rafa locks up an anaconda. And as tired as he is, he still submits the much bigger Andre Galvao with it. There's a lot of rolls of him submitting bigger people with it. Lachlan Giles is one of the best anaconda chokers ever. Not a big guy by any means. Right now, Baby Shark is one of the best anaconda choke players in the game. He's also 66 kilos, pretty small guy. And I think it comes down to how much more easily you can use your legs to attack the trapped arm and really use all 4 limbs to help pin and submit the opponent. With the Darce and the guillotine, you can use your legs too to help the choke, but not in a way that as directly attacks the most fundamental parts of your opponent's position, which again are going to be their posture and their ability to keep their elbows in tight to their side. And so again, when you roll behind the head like that with sort of that Armin guillotine style grip, and you really get your legs up over the top and you bite both your legs on top of your opponent's arm and drag that elbow open, you can hold them there forever. So even if you're small, your legs are going to be strong enough to have your 2 legs attack your opponent's arm. I mean, 2 legs are always going to be stronger than an arm. And then even if your arms are pretty short, if someone's elbow is open all the way up over their head, there's not a lot of space from their neck to their armpit at that point. So you don't have to have long arms at all to punch a full anaconda choke into place. And I think it just really comes down to how well you can use your legs from the angle of the position. You can use your whole body, and it just makes a big difference, even if you're really small.
Something that I've observed about jiu-jitsu, just watching people get better over time, is that when people start out in jiu-jitsu, they're obsessively focused about what to do with their hands. And they're not really thinking about how to coordinate the rest of their body into an attack. And I think this is part of the reason why it's so easy to pass the guard of a white belt, is because they haven't really got to the point yet where they can use their legs like an extra set of hands. They're so focused on what they're gripping that they kind of just ignore their legs, and that makes it easy to just pass them. And you bring up a good point that with the anaconda choke, it's not just about your arms. It's not just about latching on a head and arm triangle and squeezing until the person gives up. But a big thing that's going to help you finish and close that off is using your legs, especially if you can intertwine your legs with the other person's to get some leverage. It's not just about getting the big squeeze. So maybe for big people, it's easier. I mean, I don't know, but maybe if you're really, really big and you've got big, long, strong arms, it's easier to just get the squeeze. But you don't have to just be squeezing with your arms to get the submission. You're often engaging your whole body into this. It's a concept on the podcast we've talked about, is the idea of using overwhelming force. Don't just squeeze with your hands, but always try to be asking yourself when you're doing a submission, how can I put my whole body into this? What are my legs doing? What's my core doing? What's my head doing, right? Am I using every weapon I've got at my disposal to tighten this? So if people are struggling to really finish this thing, one problem they might be having is that they're too focused on what they're doing with their arms and not enough with the rest of their body.
Yeah, for sure. The full body is super important. And it's funny because I think once you get better at training and once you've trained longer, you're not always thinking about your hands. You're thinking about what your body's doing. So for me, I'm thinking about the hands absolutely last. It's the very last thing that comes into place. But yeah, you're right. With newer people, they're definitely thinking about their hand position and everything. And then just anecdotally, I wanted to insert this piece of info at some time in the podcast, but they put up the stats for all of the chokes in the history of the UFC, how many times the chokes happened. And then they had a cool stat on there that was the percentage of the time they cause unconsciousness, right? And the Anaconda, more than any other choke in UFC history, causes the highest percentage of people to fall asleep. And I'll just say anecdotally, I don't know why it's this way, but it's definitely the choke that I've put the most people to sleep with by accident. So especially when those legs are involved. So I don't know what it is about that. I think when it's done perfectly, you really don't feel any discomfort at all. It's very different from the Darce in that way. The Darce can have quite a strong discomfort element to it, but the Anaconda is just so sleepy and gentle and doesn't really hurt at all. I think that a lot of times people don't realize they're in as much trouble as they are, and then they're waking up.
I think part of it too might just be trained experience. If you are caught in a submission that you're experienced getting caught in, you know when you're in trouble. But as you brought up earlier, the Anaconda just doesn't currently have the level of popularity that something like a Darce choke does. So it could be that, I don't know, I'm speculating. Maybe it's not even that it's mechanically more efficient. It could also just be that people aren't used to being caught in an Anaconda, so they don't recognize the signs. I've been in the situation before where I've used novel submissions or I've had novel submissions used against me, and those are the ones that I can remember where it led to someone going unconscious. And it might have just been because they didn't expect it, right? One time I was put unconscious by someone Ezekiel-ing me in my own closed guard. And this is back when I was a white belt, before I understood that that was actually a legit option if you know what you're doing. And I just didn't take it seriously. I didn't even realize I was in trouble. And I've had this happen with other people where if I do something unexpected, it just catches them so off guard that they don't even go into that trained behavior of, oh, I'm in this submission and I know where the danger zone is. It's just something new for them. So that might be all it is. It might just be that. And this is maybe a reason why we should actually explore more new and novel techniques rather than just chasing what's high percentage, because sometimes those weird things that people don't expect can be the most effective because the other person has spent less time training against them.
I think you're right. And then I think you're right. The more I think about it, that is probably a pretty big factor. If somebody's in something they don't usually, think about how many people we saw fall asleep on buggy chokes like the first year or so that those got really popular. I think that people just didn't realize how much trouble they were in, possibly until it was too late.
Now, we talked about using submissions as position and about body dimensions. Looking at the Kimura as an example, about 10 or so years ago, the Kimura was basically known as a big guy move. And it was kind of just assumed that if you were doing Kimuras and getting them, then that probably means you're just a big dude. And if you're a small person, probably you don't want to waste your time on this because it's a big guy move. But then the Short Kings reclaimed this technique as one of our own, right? It was kind of discovered that you don't have to just rip the Kimura and tap the person from top half guard. You can use this as a tool for positional advancement. And that's where the whole Kimura trap game got developed. And really the power of the Kimura these days is not so much to just tap someone immediately, but to use this as a way to move up the positional hierarchy while your opponent is stuck in this awful position. And I think that's an interesting change, not just because people discovered this, but also because it changed the way that people think about this move as, this is a big guy move, to then realizing, well, maybe it's a big guy move if you're, trying to tap someone with it immediately, but you can still use this move to devastating effect for positional control, even if you're smaller. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on whether you think the Anaconda choke falls into that category. You mentioned that size is not the biggest consideration with the Anaconda. What should a small person be thinking of if they want to use this to maybe control a bigger person? I'm presuming that you would tell me it's probably a bit riskier if you're smaller to just try to do a gator roll when you've got the big guy in turtle, but there's probably other things that you can do to really mess up their alignment and get better position. What would you suggest a smaller person do if they want to integrate the Anaconda into their game? And I'd just love to get your thoughts on whether you think it's a good idea for them to be trying to finish the submission as quickly as maybe maybe a bigger person would.
Sure, yeah. I think for smaller people, I would actually worry about it from the front headlock potentially last. I would really, with all the head and arm chokes mostly, I would really start to practice it from a position where your partner is bottom side control and they're wrestling up into you off that underhook. If you can get used to the feel for dragging that elbow up over their head and out of position as you fall behind the head and really learn how to keep them pinned right there, then you can start to integrate it into the front headlock position and find how you can lean your arm against their elbow to get a similar effect and drag that elbow out of position also from the front headlock position. And instead of doing a full gator roll, a lot of times you can just flop down to the same side hip, end up in the same spot. So the gator roll is like the long way to get there, and you can just flop to the same side hip, and that's kind of a shortcut to get there. For smaller people, I would focus a lot on just really holding that pin and learning how to ride the tension of your partner's elbow. I call that elbow surfing. And if you can just kind of surf that elbow, like if they start to bring their elbow back to their ribs, because maybe they are realistically too big for you to keep their elbow open and just attack the anaconda from there, taking all day to do so. You can ride that tension of their elbow back on top. So as they pull their elbow in, you can ride that tension back up on top and past the guard. You can ride that tension back and switch arms to shoot through for a darce. You can ride that tension back up and then they've exposed under their throat. You can switch to a guillotine. You could ride the tension of their elbow up and then circle around to the back and start working like your chair sit attacks or your kimura attacks. So there's so much cool stuff that you can integrate it with if you don't get attached to the idea of finishing the submission right away. So if you're smaller, I would just say get a feel for that pinned position, how to hold someone there as well as you can. And if you can't hold them, all of their escape options are going to be through their elbow and bringing their elbow back to their ribs. So find different ways to surf that tension of their arm and let it do the work for you to help carry you back up to a top position or other attacking positions, whether they're other head and arm chokes or back attacks or crucifix or kimura. There's lots of really cool options. But yeah, if you're smaller, I would definitely probably look at the front headlock later and spend some of your early time with the anaconda, darce, guillotine, other head and arm chokes, finding them as your opponent tries to come up from bottom position with an underhook. And funny enough, I would really discourage people from attacking the head and arm chokes inside of the half guard until they have a lot more experience. And even then, I think a lot of times if you're able to get these chokes to work from inside the half guard, you probably have a length advantage on your training partner, or you probably have a lot more skill. So I don't see a lot of people successfully doing this from inside the half guard, which is funny because when you and I kind of came up training, that was one of the main places you saw these attacks from. But nowadays too, people don't play conventional half guard as much. So I would really encourage it from like top side control specifically, or top knee on belly, but not as much top half guard.
It's interesting that you bring that up because when we had Matt Skaff on the podcast, he said the exact same thing. He said that he likes to attack the anaconda as people are coming up from bottom side control, like they're trying to maybe get an underhook and get up onto their side. And what's interesting is that's a scenario where many people think darce choke, but the idea of going for the anaconda from there is also pretty cool. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right that it can be hard for a smaller person to finish something like an anaconda from half guard. And part of it is just body length. You have to kind of crunch a person up and you got to get past their frames and their defenses. I found a problem as a smaller person with trying to finish a bigger person from top half guard is I always feel like I'm getting stretched out. I have to kind of like extend my body to compensate for the length difference. And usually when you have to extend your body, you kind of wind up lying on the person like a blanket, and that gives them some leverage over you where they can then launch you. So that's kind of a challenge with using a lot of these as submissions from top half guard is if you've got to stretch yourself out to traverse this giant's body, then you actually make your body weaker in terms of its ability to defend against things like just a big throw.
Yeah, I agree. And you can actually get your legs stretched out pretty good if somebody has a good like coyote hook, or sometimes they can even, or a lockdown. Sometimes people can wrench on your leg pretty good. And even if you have a finishing grip in there, if they really extend that leg, they may not injure you, but they can it can cause some discomfort. I think it's smarter to just learn how to pass the guard and then think about your head and arm attacks after that.
Something you said, you mentioned elbow surfing, and I really like that idea. I've never heard of that before, and it gets me thinking, this could be a really great way to practice the Anaconda choke and working with it more successfully. So rather than just trying to bang off a bunch of drills where you latch onto an Anaconda from turtle and then try to gator roll, to just focus on trying to elbow surf and keep their elbow open. Have you experimented with using this as a game in class to give people more reps with the mechanics of trying to free that elbow? Because I can see that being a better way to train the Anaconda than just trying to finish a person.
Absolutely. I'll give you a fun game right now that people can listen to. So basically, until I say go, both people are going to cooperate, right? So I have you in a chin strap over the top front headlock, and then whether it's with my hand or whether it's with my arm, I'm going to go over the top of your arm, right? So we're almost in like a classic front headlock position, but now I'm going to fall all the way onto my back, and you're going to fall on your back too. So both of our bellies are facing up to the ceiling. One person's inside like a chin strap and an elbow control, and the other person is just inside of there. And the elbow is, again, I have it pulled all the way up over your head. It's glued to my chest. And basically, as the defensive person, your goal is just going to be to fully disconnect from your partner's body. If you can get the hand off your head and get the arm off your arm, you're free. However you can disconnect is going to be a win. On offense, you are going to have to go from that chin and elbow grip to piecing together some kind of guillotine, some kind of darce, Mars, Anaconda. You've got to put together a guillotine or some kind of figure four choke. And you're mostly just going to be focusing on controlling the posture and riding and surfing that tension of the elbow in order to do it. And you're just going to allow the defensive person to kind of move around, and you can even close your eyes and just really feel their elbow, feel where their elbow's moving and how it can help pull your arms into the positions they need to be in to get those chokes, or pull your body onto a top position or a side position or anywhere in between that's going to find you an advantageous angle to close your grips around the neck. That's a fun drill that you can do. And then you can start it from different positions. So you can start it from both people on their back, belly up. You can start it from a conventional front headlock, belly down. You can start it. A really fun one I've been doing is I've been telling students, hey, you get to lock a fully locked darce, Anaconda, guillotine, necktie, whatever you choose, and we're going to roll from here until the partner escapes, but you are not allowed to finish the choke that you start with. So if you fully lock up a darce, you aren't allowed to finish a darce. It has to be an Anaconda or a guillotine or something else. And that way your body gets the practice on how to surf that tension through the elbow and move your arms from lock to lock and keep enough control on them to not lose them, while also locking a different head and arm choke. So it helps make your head and arm chokes more seamless.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of something you said earlier on the podcast. You talked about how the Anaconda has a lot in common with the triangle, which is that sometimes people get in trouble because they try to finish it too early. They don't really have control. They just see that I've got this person's head and arm between my legs, so therefore I have a triangle. But in reality, it is a lot harder to get a person in a triangle and finish it than just getting their head and arm trapped. There's a lot more mechanics, and you have to actually really actively work to finish it. Tell me a little bit about how this applies with submissions like this, not just the Anaconda, but also the triangle. What leads to this problem, do you think, where people try to they latch on, and technically maybe what they're in, it kind of looks like they have a triangle or an Anaconda, but they're trying to finish too early? What's really the difference between it's too early to finish versus now it's time to finish?
I think in general, people are way too impatient. And I was until like 2 years ago. I just really started purposefully cultivating my patience like very shortly before I got my black belt, which is 2 years this month. And I just think that people get a whiff of the finish and they just want to clamp onto it and do it. You know, what we do is physical, it's hard, it's stressful earlier on. And I think you know that if you know the pain of what it feels like to have a submission and lose it, and that you can lose a whole round after that. You can get dominated pretty badly if you are like right at the finish line and don't finish something. So I think anytime, especially earlier on in their career, when people get opportunities to finish, they just hunker down and they sell it all out on trying to finish right there. And I think it takes a lot of purposeful mindset development to cultivate this skill of not rushing once you see the finish line and not trying to just go harder, faster, quicker to try to put a finish together, and just staying patient and trusting the process that you're going to see it through, even if it takes a couple more seconds, right? And yeah, I think a lot of it's just cultivating patience. But a lot of it, I think, more than specific technical related stuff, is just not being patient enough.
Good point. Good point. It's too easy to get tunnel vision when you see the possibility of a submission, and that sometimes blinds you to potentially better options. And it might also motivate you to try to finish before it's time. And this can lead to all sorts of problems. It can lead to sacrificing the position. It can lead to burning out your arms or your legs because you tried to squeeze when there was nothing there. If nothing else, it can also lead to telegraphing your intent to your opponent. So I think that's an important thing to bring up just in general with submissions, is not getting tunnel vision when you think there's the possibility of a submission. On the podcast, we've talked about this and we've described it as diving for submissions, where people, they think they see one and so they throw away any positional control they have for the shot at getting a submission. And that's kind of like rolling the dice to see if you'll get it or not. It's easy to sometimes get false positives by doing that, because every once in a while you will actually get a submission. But a lot of the time, when you try to just jump into a submission or finish before it's time to finish, you run the risk of losing the whole thing or burning yourself out before you actually achieve any goal.
Yeah, and do you just want to get a submission right now, or do you want to have the cleanest expression of your jiu-jitsu as you can? And some people might answer that differently, and that's cool. I just want people to have thought about it. If you are a person that really just cares about the outcome over everything else, and you don't care how you pass the guard, how you sweep, how you get your taps, if it's the ugliest game in the world and you don't care, if that's beautiful to you, hey, that's cool. But I just want people to think about it. Like, I will never tell anybody else how to roll or how to train, but just And I'll never make excuses. If I lose, you got me. But just with me, I like to have my technique kind of be as clean and sharp as possible, and not trying to sound like a snob about it. It just, with me, that's important to me. So things like being patient and finding that perfect angle, or even if it's not perfect, just trying to chase it as close to being as efficient as possible, because I want to train for life. I want to train as many years as possible. I don't want to get tendonitis in my arms from squeezing everything super hard. I want to be able to roll a lot of rounds. I train almost every day. Like, I want to be able to preserve my body and get that clean, smooth technique that's going to help me train for a lot of years.
Yeah. One other thing, something that I've observed, and I'd love your feedback on this to hear if you think I'm right or if my idea can be refined somehow, is when you look at submissions, you can kind of categorize them by how many levers am I attacking right now when I do the submission. So for example, if I do an arm bar, I'm attacking one lever. The submission is an attempt to break one arm. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm only touching or connecting or controlling that one arm. If I do an arm bar properly, I'm using all of the parts of my body and I'm trying to pin you in place, which means I'm actually controlling more than just this one arm. But really, what I'm trying to do is I'm attacking one arm, right? That is the mechanic of the submission. Many submissions are like that, where you're attacking one lever. So for example, an arm out guillotine is the same. A heel hook would be the same, things like that. You also then have this category of two lever attacks, where you are attacking two things at once. And the most common example of that is going to be head and arm chokes. So for example, the head and arm choke, the Anaconda, the Darce, the triangle. These are all examples of I am attacking two parts of my opponent's body at the same time. And then you have weird outliers, right? I mean, there are some very rare submissions that attack three parts at the same time, like the dead orchard or the triangle, but I mean, they're very exotic, right? And there's even submissions that attack no parts of the body, like a bear hug. But we're getting very exotic now. My point, though, is that there's some commonalities behind these groups that I've observed, and tell me if I'm wrong. What I have found is if I'm doing a submission that attacks one part of the body, like an arm bar, I can probably get a lot more braking power onto that submission. I can probably drive all of my force into that one attack. So I find as a smaller person, if I'm attacking a bigger person, if I actually get the submission, it's more likely that I'm going to do that by attacking one body part, right? Like a rear naked choke, an arm out guillotine, an arm bar, something like that. Whereas if I am attacking two body parts at the same time, like a triangle choke, a head and arm, a darce, an anaconda, I find that in those situations, I can't get the same amount of finishing power. And it's probably simply because I'm attacking two body parts at once, right? My efforts are divided. I'm not going all in on one of this person's levers. I'm splitting my power. But on the other hand, I maybe make up for that because I also get more control. If I'm attacking two of your body parts, that's two weapons that you can't use to fight back. And also you start to see benefits like you can't rotate properly or as easily, right? I mean, a lot of escapes from single lever attacks like heel hooks or even guillotines or things like that, they can involve rolling or spinning or doing things like this. It's a lot harder to do that if the person is latching onto two parts of your body at the same time. So I've always looked at this as a balance where if I attack one lever, then I get more power, but maybe less control. If I attack two levers, I get more control, but maybe less power. And I've always used that as kind of a guidepost to determine which submission to use. So for example, if I am sparring with a bigger person, I will be more inclined to do things like go for rear naked chokes, arm bars, kimuras, arm out guillotines. If I'm sparring with someone where I'm more focused on, I just want to hold this person down, I will go for things like arm triangles, anacondas, darces, because then I know or at least I feel I have a better chance of holding them in position and keeping my position. Am I crazy or do you think that makes sense?
No, not only does that make sense, but that's how I heard your terminology before on the single and two lever, and that's how I explain it to people now. I do think there's more raw horsepower on the single lever attacks, but I think a lot of times perfection is the enemy of good enough, right? Sometimes you don't need maximum horsepower, right? Or you can merge the two. Like if somebody's bigger and you feel like you need a single lever attack to finish them, you can use a double lever to start it off and you attack like an arm in guillotine, for example. But then once you get the security of your legs in place, then you can disconnect your hands and reconnect in front of the shoulder for a single lever naked guillotine. And then you have the horsepower that you need, but you use that two lever control to kind of lure them in and get a more dominant attacking position on them. And then if it's still not enough horsepower to finish, you can re-grip if you need to. So I think that's an excellent way to think of it. And keeping that strategy in mind is an important thing as you keep training.
Yeah. The reason why I bring this up is because if you are doing a two lever submission, like an anaconda, you should always remember that the power of these kinds of submissions isn't immediate finishing power. It's the control you get. So when you are doing a two lever submission, you often want to be a bit more patient because the control is the secret weapon that makes those work. It's not the immediate finishing power. I mean, if I snap on a front guillotine on you with an arm out, I know I can finish that in just a matter of seconds as long as you don't rotate or get out somehow. But I can finish that much, much quicker. Same with an arm bar or a rear naked choke. But if I put on a triangle or an arm triangle, I need to keep my patience and not rush to the finish, because it will be harder to get that finish since it's a two lever submission. So I need to focus on maintaining my control and the patience. That was a big game changer for me when it came to actually doing the triangle from guard. I mean, I have short legs, so it's kind of hard anyway, but rushing to the finish is a good way to get your guard passed if you're trying to triangle someone from the bottom. And I think with the Anaconda, the same lesson applies, which is that patience is the key when you're doing a submission that involves attacking two body parts at the same time, like the head and the arm. But that's pretty much everything I wanted to bring up, Drew, but you're the expert here. Is there anything else that you think is really critical for the Anaconda that we want to talk about here to make sure people know?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's kind of a different technique, but I would just say people should also invest a lot of time into that high wrist guillotine that's getting really popular right now. Craig Jones and Gordon Ryan both have a lot of info out there on it, but your arms are basically disconnected. You have a very deep guillotine with one arm with your hand high up over their shoulders, and then you have like an arming guillotine grip with your other arm, but your hands don't actually ever touch. When you attack these anacondas and these darces with that elbow surfing style, you're going to find there's a lot of pockets to naturally find that high wrist guillotine as well. So I would practice that if you aren't used to that. There's plenty of resources out that you can find if you look at that. And then the main other thing, I just wanted to shout out Ryan Hall as well, because he was exploring a lot of those elbow surfing ideas like 10, 12 years ago. And I just heard Joseph Jen talking about that on a podcast recently. And Ryan used to be like a really big influence to me. I used to drive up there and train with him a decent amount. And I just wanted to make sure he got a shout out, because since I've been in the game a long time, I like trying to give credit to people if I got ideas from them. And most of the stuff that I figured out with these hidden arm chokes is an extension of stuff that Ryan Hall was doing back in the day.
Yep, absolutely. The concept of an open elbow was something that was communicated to me by people who got it from Ryan Hall. So I would also give credit as well. I think that he can probably be considered one of the people who first brought that idea to the jiu-jitsu mainstream of the importance of opening up the elbows. And regardless of the submission you're doing, I mean, if we want to talk about purely messing with someone's alignment, if you can keep their elbow open, it takes away a lot of their options. This is one of those little things where if you're trying to transition from a technique-based game to more of a concept-based jiu-jitsu game, thinking of how can I just open my opponent's elbows at all times? That's one of those little things like how can I twist their neck? It's always going to attack their alignment and it's always going to make things tighter. So just something to think about, right? Always look for windows to open someone's elbow space.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's huge. Ryan Hall's, that was it on that open elbow. It's instructional. It still holds up well if anybody can still find that online. But yeah, it's absolutely.
Well, I will do my best to put links to all of this stuff in the show notes. But Drew, the big thing that people might want to look at is your instructional here. So if they listen to this and they're inspired to go out and master the Anaconda, to figure out some antics, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, if you just go to dartsdynamics.com, anything on there you can grab and use the discount code BJJMM. That'll give you 20% off. And yeah, the Darce one is a little bit more dense and a little bit more concept based. And then some of the feedback I got on that was that, hey, for blue belts and up, we really like this, but maybe for like super beginners, something more simple is on there. So I refilmed a crash course on the Darce instructional. I uploaded that if you're a little bit newer. And then with the Anaconda one, I went in a different direction and tried to make it more step-by-step and kind of a little less concept-based. So I'm just trying out different approaches. And I've got good feedback on both of them, but they are both kind of different in style. So the Anaconda one is more formatted how you see most instructionals formatted. And the Darce one is a little bit denser and headier.
Well, sir, I will put a link to that in the show notes as I always do. I will also put a link to all of your other work. If people are listening to this and they're thinking, man, it's so nice to hear a guy who makes sense and understands jiu-jitsu. I'm sick of listening to this Steve idiot. This Drew guy is where it's at. Where can people listen to your podcast?
Yeah, they can look up Neon, Neon, Neon Belly. It's on Spotify. It's anywhere you listen to podcasts. I have that other podcast, The State of the Meta, that's on the BJJ Mental Models Premium. And then I'm just on Instagram, Drew Darce. If you want to follow me, if you message me, I'll try my best to help with anything I can. I am pretty busy, but I'll do my best to get back with people.
Amazing, sir. Well, I will put links to all of those in the show notes. I mean, I would just throw in here personally that you're one of my favorite guys in the sport. I mean, not just personally, but in terms of just the conceptual and intelligent way that you think about jiu-jitsu and the way that you communicate it. Just listening to this call with you today here, something that I've observed about a lot of you guys in the States is that you have a really good way of using language as metaphor. Things like elbow surfing, for example. It's such an intuitive way to explain something. And so I always encourage people to follow you and check out your work. It's just such a great analytical resource. So again, I'll put links to all of that in the show notes. I'll also put a link to all of our stuff. Everything we make lives at BJJMentalModels.com. Over 300 episodes at this point, all free, all timeless, all educational, many of them with Mr. Drew right here. So again, BJJMentalModels.com for everything there. Also, I recommend people check out our newsletter. It's completely free. Got about 12,000 subscribers now and growing like crazy. Sign up for that at BJJMentalModels.com also, and you'll get detailed show notes. You'll get specials. You'll get thought pieces on some of the stuff that we talk about related to and also off the show. Really proud of what we do there. And of course, all of this is powered by BJJ Mental Models Premium. That is our subscription service that's intended to give you everything you need to really elevate your conceptual and mental model thinking of jiu-jitsu. If you're struggling with memorizing techniques and you feel overwhelmed, I really suggest that you check out the service. The first 7 days are free, so there's no risk. Reasons you might want to do that is because it includes what is, to my knowledge, the biggest library of audio jiu-jitsu courses anywhere in the world. We've got a variety of awesome experts and coaches there who contribute. I mentioned earlier, one of the courses you'll get is Submission as Position with Rob Bernacki. Just a really great breakdown, kind of like we talked about here today. Many of the major submissions and how those can be played as positions to tighten up your jiu-jitsu. You'll also get podcasts that are exclusively available on Premium. One of them is Drew's podcast, State of the Meta. It's just a really awesome podcast that breaks down current developments in the jiu-jitsu competition meta space. So again, all of that is at bjjmentalmodels.com. And you can also go up to our coaching tier, and you'll even get direct coaching from black belts all around the world, including Drew, actually. So if you want Drew to tell you specifically how your jiu-jitsu sucks and how you can make it better, bjjmentalmodels.com, join the coaching tier. There we go. But Drew, man, thanks a lot. I will put links to all of that in the show notes. But as always, I really appreciate you coming by. You got such a great mind for this stuff. I know that it can be hard to explain a specific technique over audio, but I can't think of many people who do it better than you. So thanks again for coming by, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me. Anytime.
Most welcome. Thanks to the listeners too. We will talk to you next week. See you soon and have a great day.